The sun burned against Abigail Turner's parched skin as she struggled against the ropes binding her to the gnarled mesquite tree, her throat so dry it felt like sandpaper when she swallowed. 3 days. It had been 3 days since the Dorsey gang had left her here to die, punishment for refusing the advances of their leader. New Mexico Territory, 1878. A time when law was scarce and justice scarcer. Abigail had come west 6 months earlier, following the death of her parents in Philadelphia. At 22, she'd inherited enough money to start fresh, to escape the memories and the suitors who saw only her inheritance. The West promised opportunity, freedom, a new beginning. The land had delivered on its promise of beauty-sweeping vistas of red rock, endless skies that changed colors like a painter's palette, and stars that hung so low at night she felt she could reach up and pluck them from the heavens. What the romanticized stories in Eastern newspapers failed to mention was the brutality, the lawlessness, and men like Jeb Dorsey. She'd purchased a small plot of land near Santa Fe with plans to open a small hotel for travelers. Her dreams had seemed achievable until Dorsey rode into town, took one look at her, and decided she belonged to him. When she'd refused his proposal, if one could call a drunken declaration of ownership, a proposal he'd waited until she was traveling back from town alone and ambushed her. "You'll change your mind out here," he'd sneered, tightening the ropes around her wrists. 3 days without water changes a woman's perspective. Abigail had spat in his face, earning herself a backhand that still throbbed across her cheek. Now, as the 3rd day's sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, she knew she wouldn't survive another night. The desert's mercy was non-existent, scorching heat by day, bone-chilling cold by night. She closed her eyes, trying to conserve what little moisture remained in her body. The sounds of the desert heightened in her darkness, the skittering of lizards across sand, the distant cry of a hawk, the whisper of the wind through the sparse vegetation. These would be the last sounds she heard in this life. Then, cutting through her resignation, came a new sound, the rhythmic thud of hoofbeats. Abigail forced her eyes open, certain she was hallucinating. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. From the gathering darkness emerged a silhouette, a rider on horseback, moving steadily toward her. "Help!" she tried to call, but her voice was barely a rasp. The rider drew closer, and Abigail could make out the broad shoulders, the wide-brimmed hat, the rifle slung across his saddle. He reined his horse to a stop a few yards from her and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Good Lord!" a deep voice exclaimed. "What happened to you, miss?" Abigail tried to respond, but her parched throat produced only a faint croak. The stranger approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. "Dorsey," she finally managed to whisper. The man's face hardened at the name. He knelt beside her, his features becoming clearer in the fading light. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I'm Flynn Lawson," he said, reaching for his canteen. "Here, small sips." The water that trickled between her cracked lips was the sweetest thing Abigail had ever tasted. She wanted to gulp it down, but Flynn pulled the canteen away after a few sips. "Not too much at once," he cautioned. "It'll make you sick." He drew a knife from his belt and carefully cut through the ropes binding her to the tree. As her arms fell free, pain shot through her shoulders, causing her to gasp. "I've got you," Flynn said, catching her as she slumped forward. "How long have you been out here?" 3 days, Abigail whispered, her voice gradually returning. Flynn's expression darkened. 3 days in this heat. Dorsey's going to pay for this." He helped her to his horse, supporting most of her weight as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "My camp's not far," he explained, lifting her onto his saddle. "Just over that rise. You need food, water, and rest." Flynn mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his free hand. Abigail found herself leaning back against his chest, too weak to sit upright on her own. "Thank you," she murmured, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait already lulling her toward unconsciousness. "Stay with me," Flynn urged, his breath warm against her ear. "What's your name?" "Abigail Turner." "Well, Miss Turner, I need you to stay awake until we reach camp." "Can you do that for me?" She nodded weakly, focusing on the feel of his arm around her waist, the solid presence of him behind her. It was strange to feel safe in the arms of a man she'd just met, but something about Flynn Lawson inspired trust. His camp was simple but well-organized: a small fire pit, a bedroll, and saddlebags propped against a flat rock. He helped her dismount and settled her near the fire, which he quickly rekindled. "More water," he said, holding the canteen to her lips again. "Slow now." After she'd had her fill, he busied himself preparing a thin broth from dried meat and herbs. The savory smell made Abigail's stomach clench with hunger. "What brings you to these parts, Miss Turner?" Flynn asked as he stirred the pot. In halting sentences, Abigail explained her journey west, her plans for the hotel, and Dorsey's unwanted attention. Flynn listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "I know of Dorsey," he said when she'd finished. "He and his gang have been terrorizing settlements from here to Arizona. They robbed a stagecoach last month, killed the driver and a passenger. Are you a lawman?" Abigail asked, Flynn's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Used to be. U.S. Marshal out of Colorado. Now I'm what you might call a freelance agent of justice. A bounty hunter, something like that. I've been tracking Dorsey for 3 weeks. He handed her a tin cup of broth. "Though I didn't expect to find one of his victims still alive." Abigail sipped the broth, feeling strength gradually return to her limbs. "What will you do when you find him? Bring him in? Dead or alive?" Flynn's voice held no emotion, but his eyes flashed with something cold and determined. "The reward on his head is substantial." They fell silent as Abigail finished her meal. Flynn tended to his horse, unpacked his bedroll and laid it out for her. "You need rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." Abigail wanted to protest, to insist she was fine, but exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden. She lay down, pulling the rough wool blanket around her shoulders. "Flynn," she murmured as sleep began to claim her, "will you be gone when I wake up?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "No, Miss Turner, I'll be here." True to his word, Flynn was tending the fire when Abigail opened her eyes the next morning. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading into the pale blue of dawn. "Morning," he said, offering her a tin cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Abigail replied, surprised to find it was true. Her muscles ached and her skin felt tight and burned from the sun, but the fog of dehydration had lifted. "Thank you." Flynn nodded, his attention on the horizon. "We should move soon. Dorsey might come back to check on you." Fear clutched at Abigail's heart. "Where will we go?" "There's a town about 20 miles east, Cottonwood Springs. Small, but they've got a doctor who can look at you properly." He hesitated. "After that, I need to continue tracking Dorsey." Abigail nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course he wouldn't abandon his mission for her. She was just an unexpected complication in his hunt. They broke camp efficiently, Flynn packing his few belongings while Abigail tried to make herself presentable. Her dress was torn and filthy, her hair a tangled mess, but there was little she could do about either without proper supplies. As they rode east, the sun climbing higher in the sky, Abigail told Flynn more about herself, her childhood in Philadelphia, Her parents' deaths from influenza, her decision to seek a new life in the West. "What about you?" she asked. "How does a U.S. Marshal become a bounty hunter?" Flynn was quiet for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "I had a partner," he said. "Best lawman I ever knew. We tracked a gang of outlaws into the Colorado mountains 2 years ago. I got careless, let myself be seen. They ambushed us." He paused. "Thomas died. I didn't." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "The territorial judge ruled there wasn't enough evidence to convict the gang leader. He walked free." Flynn's arm tightened around her waist. "I turned in my badge that day. Decided the law needed some help from outside the system." "And Dorsey, is he connected to that gang?" "No, but men like him need to be stopped one way or another." They reached Cottonwood Springs by mid-afternoon. It was little more than a cluster of buildings along a dusty main street: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of houses. Flynn helped Abigail dismount outside a whitewashed building with a faded sign identifying it as Dr. Emerson's office. The doctor, a balding man with kind eyes and steady hands, examined Abigail thoroughly. He treated her sunburn with a soothing salve, wrapped her chafed wrists, and prescribed rest and plenty of fluids. "You're lucky to be alive, young lady," he said gravely. "Another day out there would have been the end of you." While Abigail was being examined, Flynn arranged for a room at the town's only boarding house, a neat 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Hollister. The older woman clucked sympathetically at Abigail's appearance and immediately offered a hot bath and clean clothes. "My daughter was about your size," she explained, laying out a simple blue dress. "She passed 2 winters ago. Consumption. These have just been gathering dust." The bath was heavenly, washing away days of grime and fear. Abigail soaked until the water cooled, then dressed in the borrowed clothes, grateful for Mrs. Hollister's generosity. Flynn was waiting in the small parlor downstairs, deep in conversation with a man Abigail didn't recognize. He rose when she entered, his eyes widening slightly at her transformed appearance. "Miss Turner," he said, clearing his throat. "You look recovered." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his gaze. "Mrs. Hollister was kind enough to lend me some clothes." Flynn introduced his companion as Sheriff Walter Grant. "He's been helping me track Dorsey's movements." The sheriff tipped his hat to Abigail. "Madam, Lawson here tells me you had a run-in with Dorsey's gang. I'd be obliged if you'd give me a statement about what happened." Abigail recounted her ordeal once more, the sheriff taking notes in a small leather-bound book. When she finished, he shook his head grimly. "Sounds like Dorsey, all right. He's grown bolder since crossing into New Mexico territory. Last month it was just robbery. Now he's graduated to kidnapping and attempted murder." "Any idea where he might be headed?" Flynn asked. "Word is he's planning something big at the Carson Mine payroll delivery next week," Sheriff Grant replied. "That'd be his biggest score yet." Flynn nodded thoughtfully. "Carson Mine is 4 days' ride from here. If I leave tomorrow, I can get there in time to set up." Abigail felt her heart sink. Tomorrow. He was leaving tomorrow. The sheriff departed shortly after, promising to telegraph the territorial marshal about increasing security at the mine. Mrs. Hollister served a simple but hearty dinner of beef stew and freshly baked bread, which Abigail and Flynn ate in relative silence. After dinner, they sat on the boarding house's small porch, watching as darkness settled over the town. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "What will you do now?" Flynn asked, breaking the silence. "Will you return to your land near Santa Fe?" Abigail hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of returning alone, knowing Dorsey might come for her again, filled her with dread. "I don't know," she admitted. "My dream was to build something of my own, to create a place where travelers could find comfort and rest. But now—" "You shouldn't abandon your dream because of men like Dorsey," Flynn said quietly. "The West needs more people like you, people who build rather than destroy." "It's not just fear," Abigail replied. "Though there is that, it's also practicality. I can't defend the property alone, and hiring reliable help out here isn't easy." Flynn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What if Dorsey were no longer a threat?" "You mean if you catch him?" "When I catch him," Flynn corrected. "Would you return then?" Abigail considered the question. "Perhaps, with the right partner, someone who shared the vision." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and something unspoken passed between them. Flynn looked away first, his gaze returning to the distant horizon. "I should leave at first light," he said, his voice rougher than before. "The sooner Dorsey is brought to justice, the safer these territories will be." "Of course," Abigail murmured, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand." They sat in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts. When Abigail finally rose to retire for the night, Flynn caught her hand. "Abigail," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I'm glad I found you in that desert." She smiled, squeezing his hand before releasing it. "So am I, Flynn, so am I." Morning came too quickly. Abigail rose with the sun, determined to see Flynn off properly. Mrs. Hollister had packed him provisions for the journey: jerky, hardtack, coffee, and a small jar of preserves. "For sweetening the journey," the older woman said with a wink that made Flynn's ears redden. He secured the provisions in his saddlebags, checked his weapons, and tightened his horse's cinch. Every movement was efficient, practiced, the routine of a man accustomed to life on the trail. "Sheriff Grant will look in on you," Flynn told Abigail as he prepared to mount. "And Mrs. Hollister has agreed to let you stay as long as you need." "Thank you for arranging that," Abigail said, trying to keep her voice steady, "and for everything else." Flynn hesitated, one foot in the stirrup. "I'll be back," he said suddenly, "after Dorsey is dealt with." "If you're still here." "I'll be here," Abigail promised, her heart lightening. "Be careful, Flynn." He nodded once, swung into the saddle, and touched the brim of his hat in farewell. Abigail watched him ride out of town, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared over the horizon. The days that followed passed slowly. Abigail helped Mrs. Hollister with chores around the boarding house, became acquainted with the townsfolk, and even assisted Dr. Emerson with organizing his medical supplies. The people of Cottonwood Springs were kind, welcoming her into their small community without question. But each night her thoughts turned to Flynn. Where was he now? Had he found Dorsey? Was he safe? On the 6th day after Flynn's departure, a commotion in the street drew Abigail to the boarding house window. A rider was galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. He reined to a stop outside the sheriff's office, dismounted, and rushed inside. Curious, Abigail stepped onto the porch just as Sheriff Grant emerged from his office, his face grim. He spotted her and approached quickly. "Miss Turner," he called, "there's news. Dorsey's gang hit the Carson mine payroll yesterday. There was a firefight. Several men wounded, including Flynn Lawson." Abigail's heart seemed to stop. "Flynn? How badly is he hurt?" "Don't know details. The telegram just said he was being brought here since we're the closest town with a doctor. They should arrive by nightfall." The hours that followed were the longest of Abigail's life. She helped Dr. Emerson prepare his surgery, boiling instruments, tearing clean strips of linen for bandages, arranging the examination table. Work kept her hands busy, but her mind raced with terrible possibilities. The sun was setting when the wagon finally arrived. escorted by 2 territorial marshals. Abigail rushed outside, her heart in her throat as they carried a stretcher toward the doctor's office. Flynn lay motionless, his face pale beneath a layer of trail dust. Blood had soaked through a makeshift bandage on his left shoulder, and his breathing was shallow. "Bullet wound to the shoulder," one of the marshals explained as they transferred Flynn to the examination table. "He's lost a lot of blood, but he managed to bring down 2 of Dorsey's men before he went down." "And Dorsey," Sheriff Grant asked, "got away, but he's wounded too." "Lawson got a shot off that caught him in the leg. He won't get far, Doctor." Emerson shooed everyone out except Abigail, whom he kept to assist. "Steady hands," he explained. "I need steady hands." The next hour was a blur of blood and concentration as the doctor extracted the bullet from Flynn's shoulder, cleaned the wound, and stitched it closed. Throughout the procedure, Flynn remained unconscious, his only responses occasional groans when the pain broke through even his unconscious state. "He's young and strong," Dr. Emerson said when they'd finished. "The bullet missed anything vital. With rest and care, he should recover fully." Abigail refused to leave Flynn's side that night, keeping vigil in a hard wooden chair beside his cot. She bathed his brow when fever set in, changed his bandages when blood seeped through, and spoke to him softly, hoping her voice might reach him through the darkness. Dawn was breaking when Flynn finally stirred, his eyelids fluttering open to reveal confused gray eyes. "Abigail," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "You're in Cottonwood Springs. You were shot, but the doctor says you'll recover." Flynn's brow furrowed as memory returned. "Dorsey escaped but wounded. The marshals are tracking him." Disappointment flashed across Flynn's face. "I was so close." "You're alive," Abigail said firmly. "That's what matters." Flynn's recovery was slow but steady. The fever broke after 2 days, and by the end of the week, he was able to sit up and take short walks around Dr. Emerson's office. Abigail visited daily, bringing home cooked meals from Mrs. Hollister's kitchen and reading to him from books borrowed from the town's small lending library. They talked for hours about their pasts, their dreams, the kind of future they hoped for. Flynn spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his years as a marshal, and the loneliness of life as a bounty hunter. Abigail shared more about her plans for the hotel, her love of architecture, and her desire to create something lasting in this wild territory. "I've been thinking," Flynn said one afternoon as they sat in the small garden behind Dr. Emerson's office, "about what you said before I left. About needing the right partner to make your hotel dream work." Abigail's heart quickened. "Oh, I'm not much of a businessman," Flynn continued, studying his hands. "But I know how to build things, how to keep a place secure, and I'm tired of chasing men like Dorsey across the territories." "What are you saying, Flynn?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I'm saying I'd like to stay with you, if you'll have me." Joy bloomed in Abigail's chest, warm and expansive. "As a business partner," a slow smile spread across Flynn's face. "To start with. Though I hope in time we might consider a more permanent arrangement." Before Abigail could respond, Sheriff Grant appeared at the garden gate, his expression unusually animated. "Lawson, Miss Turner, they got him. The territorial marshals caught up with Dorsey yesterday near the Arizona border. He resisted arrest and was shot dead." Flynn stared at the sheriff for a long moment, then turned back to Abigail. "Well," he said softly, "that's that." With Dorsey dead, a weight lifted from both their shoulders. Flynn's recovery accelerated, and within another week, Dr. Emerson declared him well enough to resume normal activities, though he cautioned against strenuous work for at least a month. "That bullet came close to some important parts," the doctor warned. "Don't go undoing my good work." Flynn and Abigail left Cottonwood Springs 2 days later, after tearful goodbyes to Mrs. Hollister and heartfelt thanks to Dr. Emerson. They traveled slowly, mindful of Flynn's healing shoulder, camping under the stars and planning their future together. "The land near Santa Fe is good," Abigail said as they sat by their campfire on the second night. "Plenty of water, close enough to town for supplies but far enough for privacy. The foundation for the main building is already laid." "How many rooms were you thinking?" Flynn asked, stoking the fire. 10 to start, with a dining room and parlor on the ground floor. Maybe expand later if business is good." Flynn nodded thoughtfully. "We could add a stable, offer fresh horses for travelers, maybe even guide services for those heading into unfamiliar territory." They reached Abigail's land on the 5th day of travel. It was just as she remembered, a gentle slope overlooking a small creek, with cottonwood trees providing natural shade. The stone foundation she'd commissioned before Dorsey's interruption waited like a promise of things to come. Flynn surveyed the site with an appraising eye. "Good location, defensible, close to water. You chose well." "We chose well," Abigail corrected, taking his hand. "This is our future now, Flynn." He turned to her, his eyes soft in the late afternoon light. "Abigail Turner, when I found you tied to that tree in the desert, I was just passing through. I had no intention of staying in one place, of building a life with anyone." He brought her hand to his lips. "Now I can't imagine any other path." "Neither can I," she whispered, stepping closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Flynn's eyes held a warmth Abigail had never seen before. "I'm not a man of many words," he said, "but I want you to know I'm in this for keeps. Wherever you go, whatever you build, I'll be right beside you." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Abigail replied, her heart full to bursting. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Santa Fe, with Mrs. Hollister making the journey to attend, and Sheriff Grant standing as Flynn's best man. The ceremony was simple, the celebration afterward lively, with locals welcoming the new couple and offering assistance with their hotel venture. Construction began the following week. Flynn proved to be as skilled with a hammer and saw as he was with a pistol, overseeing the framing of the main building while Abigail designed the interior spaces. By winter, they had 4 rooms enclosed and habitable, with work on the remaining 6 to resume in spring. Their first guests arrived in March, a family traveling to California, who had heard of the new establishment from traders in Santa Fe. More followed as word spread of the comfortable accommodations, excellent meals. Abigail had hired a cook from town, and the security provided by the presence of a former U.S. Marshal. The Cottonwood Hotel gained a reputation as an oasis in the often harsh territory, a place where travelers could find not just shelter but genuine hospitality. Flynn and Abigail worked side by side, her grace and vision complemented by his strength and practicality. On the first anniversary of the day Flynn had found Abigail tied to that desert tree, he presented her with a handcrafted rocking chair for the hotel's wide front porch. "For when we need to rest and watch the sunset," he explained. "And maybe, someday, for when you're rocking our child to sleep." Abigail's eyes filled with happy tears as she placed his hand on her slightly rounded belly. "Someday might be sooner than you think," she whispered, Flynn's face transformed with wonder. "Truly, truly. Dr. Emerson confirmed it last week when I visited town. Late summer, he thinks." Flynn gathered her in his arms, his joy too great for words. As they stood together on the porch of the home and business they'd built, watching the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from desperate fear to profound love. From isolation to connection. From being tied to a tree in the desert to creating a haven for others. The path had been unexpected, sometimes painful, but she wouldn't change a single step. "What are you thinking about?" Flynn asked, his arms still around her. "About destiny," Abigail replied, leaning back against him. "About how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones. If Dorsey hadn't left me in that desert, I still would have found you," Flynn said with quiet certainty. "Some way, somehow, I believe that." Abigail smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "Then I believe it too." As darkness fell around them, they remained on the porch, planning their future, dreaming of the years to come, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges arose, they would face them together, the woman who had survived the desert and the cowboy who had ridden through the darkness to claim her heart.